What I'm going to share with you today is a ABC data analysis Excel document that can help you analyze your data that you're collecting for a functional behavior assessment. That will also help to inform, to determine the function as well as to inform behavior intervention planning. This document has several different tabs along the bottom that are going to help you collect your data. There's the overall tab, which will just give a basic overview of the different behaviors you've collected, the frequency and the rate that those occurred. And then they're separated into individual behaviors. So if you have 3 different behaviors you're observing, behavior 1, behavior 2, and behavior 3. So you may only do 1 or 2 of those, you may do all 3. So let's start just by going through a sample here of how this could be completed. You enter some basic demographic, just the name and the dates of observation. So for instance, for this student, we observed on March 23rd through April 15th of 2014. And then in this box is the total amount of observations in hours. And there's a note that shows up to say to enter it in a decimal format, because that'll affect the way that it's computing some of the numbers below. So for example, if you observe for 15 hours and 30 minutes, it should be listed as 15.5. If it were 15 hours and 15 minutes, it would be 15.25 and so forth. So for this case, let's say we observe for 15 and a half hours. So we'll put 15.5. And let's say we observed 2 different behaviors that we were monitoring. Behavior 1 would be maybe disruptive behavior, and behavior 2, refusal behavior. So during those 15 and a half hours, we observed disruptive behavior 30 times and refusal behavior 17 times. So as you can see, as you're entering this data, it calculates the total amount of behaviors observed, which was 47 in this case, and the percentage of behavior that occurred. So for instance, disruptive behavior, of the 47 total behaviors, it occurred 63.8% of the time, and refusal behavior was 36.2%. And at the bottom is the rate. So based on the amount of disruptive behavior that occurred, which was 30, in 15.5 hours, that would compute to a rate of 1.94 disruptive behaviors per hour. And the same with refusal behavior. So all of this calculates to give you a basic idea of the amount of times that the behavior was occurring and how often. So now let's move on to the behavior tabs. Let's just do disruptive behavior for the sake of time. So I click on behavior 1, and this is where you take the data analysis sheets that you used when you were recording the behavior and transfer it over to this sheet. So if you recall, you collected context data, antecedent data, and consequences data. So based on that, you just transfer the information. So let's say with behavior 1, which is disruptive behavior, it occurred 3 times in context A, 4 times in B, 7 times in C, 2 times in D, and let's do one more. It occurred 9 times in E. So what it's doing is it's summing the total amount that it occurred in each context and the percentage that it occurred. And what it also does is it's going to highlight the ones that show up the 3 most often times. So if you notice, it occurred in E 36% of the time, C it occurred 28%, and B it occurred 16%. So it's going to highlight the ones that occurred most frequently. Let's enter some information for the antecedents as well. So as you can see, it did the same kind of thing for the antecedents. The ones that occur most frequently get highlighted. Okay, now let's move on to the consequences. The first part of the data you're going to enter is the amount of times, just like in context and antecedents, that consequences occurred. So I'm just going to enter some information again on the amount of times that each consequence was observed. Okay, and then so again, this first part it highlighted the most common. The next part you're going to do is to record out of those occurrences how many times did the behavior stop and how many times did it continue or change. So in consequence A, it occurred 11 times. So let's say, for example, it stopped at 2 times, but the behavior continued 9 times. For consequence B, it stopped at 13 times, but the behavior continued 4 times. For C, it stopped at 7 times and continued 7 times. For D, it stopped at 3 times and continued 7. For consequence E, it stopped at 8 times, continued once. And then for F, it stopped at 0 times, continued 3 times. So what you're seeing here for data now is that even though consequence A occurred 11 times, the behavior only stopped twice. So it only stopped 18% of the time. Letter B, it occurred 17 times, and the behavior stopped 13 times as a result. So that stopped it was effective 76% of the time. So again, it's highlighting it here based on how often it stopped. And then when you click on these other tabs, what it'll also show you are graphs of each of those, just to give an idea. So again, you have it broken into context, antecedents, consequences, and the amount of times that it was stopped. And it graphs each one according to the letter. And then the last tab that you can use is just a behavior statement. So based on the information you have that you entered, you can type into here the most common antecedents. So when we look back on our information here, you can either look at it in this format or on the graphs. The most common antecedents was D. So let's say that antecedent was attention was diverted. So you can enter in here when attention is diverted, student displays. So since this was behavior 1, that was disruptive behavior. In order to, so based on all the information we've gathered, we can make a statement based on the perceived function. So depending on what the consequences were and how often it stopped, we can make a statement in here about what we perceive the function to be. So you can use this information, again, you can use it in the same way to do behavior 2 and behavior 3 if you have it separated into a bunch of different behaviors. And then this will hopefully guide completing the functional behavior assessment as well as planning for the behavior intervention plan.